These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast.
So did you get back out bear hunting anymore? Or?
I didn't. I did that one bear hunt. I was down there for a week, and then I went to Africa.
Oh, that's right. You were going to Africa. Where'd you go?
I went to the Eastern Cape of South Africa.
Okay.
And went to a place called Fort Governors, and just had a wonderful time. We also went out to another part of the country there called Winterberg, and we did some gray-winged francolin hunting.
Okay.
And it was up in these big rolling hills. Reminded me a bit of the Zumwalt, but it kept reminding me of different places, and I would think about places that, you know, I'd only seen pictures of in the world. But ultimately, I was like, this is totally unique. It had layers of rim rock up high. There was some sandstone. There was big basins that made it look a little bit like eastern Montana, but it also looked a little bit like Mongolia. If you would have sent me a picture of that, the continent of Africa wouldn't have been on my top 10 guesses, you know? And it was right at 7,000 feet elevation. And it was getting into winter there. So, you know, I left here with springtime and the leaves starting to bud on the trees. Got there, their leaves had lost color and were starting to fall off the trees. They're getting ready for snow. I've got a buddy there right now. He said there's snow in the forecast today. And you know, you've got the time zone change, which is significant for one thing, but also the real 180 of season changes, especially this time of year where so much is changing for us with it coming out of winter and going into spring. And then, you know, the opposite there, it was just like standing on your head. It was a really strange experience. But anyways, when we're coming off the hill from one of these gray-winged francolin hunts, and they're a bird about like a hun, I guess. They're a little bit more drab in color. They got a different beak, but they're real similar to a hun. Anyhow, we were walking through this cattle guard, and they told us that the snakes were all gone, like no snakes this time here. And I was like, well, there's a snake, and there's a snake that had been run over on the cattle guard and was dead. And one of the guys picked it up, and they're like, oh, that's just a spitting cobra.
Just a spitting cobra.
Yeah, and they get feet of snow up there. You know, where that was is pretty close to 6,500 feet elevation.
Yeah.
Interesting.
No, last time I was over there, we had the outfitters. Well, let's see, I think it wasn't cobras. It was, but another real nasty snake. Yeah. Anyway, oh no, they're all hibernated, and they took me back to show me the guide's cabins. And I looked off of the parking area, and it was a south-facing slope and big rocks, and here's this great big snake. I said, I thought you said they were hibernated.
Yeah.
Bring your gun. But by then he'd crawled into the rocks. It wouldn't have been a good place to shoot anyway.
Yeah.
But
yeah. I was guiding a turkey hunt down in the canyons here many years ago, and we, you know, shot the bird first thing in the morning like you do. And I was like, well, let's go down to the tavern, see if they're open, get some breakfast. And we went in there, and gal that used to own it, you know, she was one of their good customers as well, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, it felt like she'd gotten into the alcohol a bit that morning already, and she was skinning a rattlesnake on the bar. You know, once she finished that up, she come over and, you know, took our order, and we had biscuits and gravy and whatever. But I was like, this is such a quintessential canyon experience for here. It's like, you go kill a turkey, go to get some breakfast. The gals, you know,
skinning a rattlesnake,
halfway sauce, skinning a rattlesnake on the bar.
That'd have to be tansies.
Yeah. But she told me that she'd seen a rattlesnake every month of the year down there at one point or another.
Yeah, about the latest one time I was doing a sheep survey off of Bartlett Bench, and down, and that place has got all kinds of snakes anyway. But this was in November, mid-November or so, but there was a snake down close to their den. I'm sure, about halfway down in the canyon.
Yeah.
But it was so slow, you had to jump up and down on it a bit. But
that's funny. Yeah, I get pretty noodly around snakes, so the Australians had a good time with me about that when I was down there last year.
Yeah.
But so Mr. Vic Coggins, you're back. For those who didn't catch the previous episode with Vic, feel free to go back and listen to that. You were a wildlife biologist here for 50 years.
Yeah, actually, I'm still working on my own business and on our own place.
So how are we into 60 years now?
It's really close to 60 years. I hate to say it, but it is.
That's
actually, in
thing.
1965, I came to Wallowa County for the first time. Worked in the summer down for the department. It was the Oregon State Game Commission then, and we worked on whatever we needed done, which was everything from chasing elk out of fields to working at the hatchery. So and one of the highlights was I did a lot of the High Lake surveys because I had a lot of horse experience, and so that was really a good experience. Yeah.
And in the 60s, horses were still a very primary means of transportation here.
Oh, they were absolutely. For us, we did when the big game surveys, most of them, or a lot of them, were done by horseback. Mule deer surveys.
Yeah, there's 2 times in high school that I rode a horse to school. One was just for the fun of it.
Yeah.
And one was because my pickup wouldn't start.
Yeah.
Because it was missing a couple teeth in the flywheel, and if you got to that point, then the starter would eat itself up. So you're always running the lottery on the flywheel. And one day I chewed my starter up, and I was like, well, I'll just go saddle up Smokey and trot on in there. But you still see kids ride horses into school. You go up to Joseph, you'll see somebody riding into town.
Downtown.
Yeah.
No, but it was, we had horses. Well, we still have some horses and some people that use them, but virtually all the districts in those days had their own horses.
Yeah.
So, or department horses. We actually had a horse ranch at Ladd Marsh in La Grande. Old regional supervisor's name was Will H. Brown, and he was an old cavalryman, so you couldn't get him away from the horses.
Yeah.
And boy, you better be able to ride or you were in for a hard time with them.
Well, there's a lot of country in the world that is still the best way to get around.
Yeah.
The Marine Corps has a horse and mule packing program at Bridgeport, California at the Mountain Warfare School.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So they still do that. They get a lot of those Mustangs out of Nevada and stuff. The Marine Corps is constantly broke, so they'll get whatever scraps they can get.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine who was he was the logistics officer for the Mountain Warfare School. He was looking at other militaries and some of our potential enemies around the world and how they were getting around in different climates. The Russians are still training with reindeer.
Yeah, it makes sense too. Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things about reindeer versus sled dogs, which are really the 2 primary animals for traversing that Arctic stuff, the dogs, you need to bring their own food, but the reindeer can go scrap it out along the way.
Yeah.
So yeah, kind of interesting. So for a while, he and I were working on trying to figure out how to get reindeer to Bridgeport, California. But he had pictures of, and I actually think that he had a set of them that were hung up somewhere of some snowshoes for horses.
Oh, was that right?
Yeah. And I was able to find some pictures and some historical evidence of that, but they were round. They weren't elongated.
Yeah.
But they were similar to like our old trapper style where they'd have a wooden hoop and then webbing in between them. I thought, man, you'd really have to train a horse in how to do that, but it's been done.
Yeah, and I think I've read about it. I don't know that I've known anybody that's ever tried it, and it's a wonder here that they didn't.
Sure, especially on stuff like that second season Minum hunt.
Yeah,
I know of many guys who have had to like stomp trails through 3 feet of snow out so they can just get their livestock out.
I know, like coming out of the upper Minum, it can snow you out. And the Lost Dean, we get those years, and that's why they have to watch or should be watching those season dates on those bull hunts.
Yeah,
and not make sure they don't get too late because.
Yeah, I mean, people have had to abandon the rigs on that Snake River hunt.
Yeah.
Come back in the spring after there's been 20 feet of snow.
Oh, I can remember rigs out on, on Lord Flat Road till they'd be out there and it wouldn't snow that much, but you got to get back.
Yep. So, well, after our last episode, Vic, it was interesting because you and I had talked about doing an episode here just on kind of the history of sheep.
Yeah.
I had several people write in and say, "Hey, can you get Vic back in to talk about sheep?" I was like, "Yeah, absolutely. We're planning on doing that." Yeah. So I'm glad that you're able to take the time and do this today. So tell me a little bit about the history of sheep in Oregon, and then the role that you played in it.
Well, in Oregon, I'll talk about both our subspecies because, Californias were restored first, and they were extirpated in probably about the early 1900s, and we got California Bighorns from BC in 1954, and they actually went to Heart Mountain, and they had a square mile pen they put them in.
Yep.
And then for years, it was difficult to get stock in those early days. People don't think about that so much now with the net gun capabilities and the different ways of capturing sheep. But in those days, they were really hard to come by. So they had that pen and literally raised sheep in that pen at Heart Mountain Refuge. And then when they got to a certain number, they turned some out. Well, they did really pretty well, and then slowly we stocked a bunch of the California herds.
How far north do the California Bighorn go? Because I think it would be surprising for a lot of people to hear that California Bighorns are in British Columbia.
Yeah, that's their northern part of their range.
Okay.
Interestingly, while we're talking about them, their sheep herds have not done well in recent years, and some of the herds had just been decimated. And so Oregon has offered them California sheep back to restock some of their ranges. It's been disease issues with them. But
we've also exported a bunch of sheep to Nevada.
Oh, yeah. We've sent a lot of sheep to Nevada and Idaho.
I talked with this on Instagram a little bit to get people's feelings. Oregonians don't feel very good about that.
I know, but we got every sheep in Oregon came from somebody else to start with.
Yeah.
So to me, it's kind of, we need to pay them back and look out for the sheep too in the different states. So, and provinces. So.
Yeah,
but I know there is
from a hunter's perspective. When I crunched up the math, it looked like if I was to draw a bighorn sheep tag in Oregon, and I had an average lifespan, I started applying when I was 12, applied until I was 76, that it'd take about 40 lifetimes.
Yeah.
So from the hunter's perspective, it's like, well, if we've got too many sheep, maybe you should just let some more of us hunt. You know?
Yeah. Well, it's usually ewe groups.
Yeah.
And then, we'll take usually, 25% will be maybe rams, younger ram. And you don't want to transplant big rams because they won't stay.
Oh.
They just drift around.
Interesting.
And so it's usually yearlings and 2-year-olds.
Yeah.
And sometimes a 3-year-old, but those are pretty risky to transplant too.
Well, I hope those other states remember us if we get into a situation where...
Well, we've got sheep from a lot of places.
Yeah.
And I was the one that usually was dealing for them in later years especially. And so I always picked the places where the record book rams were coming from.
Okay. So you were shopping for...
I was shopping. And I knew a lot of the bios in the different states from going to the Wild Sheep Conference and other wild sheep, the Wild Sheep Convention. So, in the different booths, so I was able to get some of the top stock, like some of the Montana ones.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we took some of the Montana bios that had those sheep in their districts and up the Snake River and showed them the habitat and there was a lot of behind-the-scenes things that went on.
Yeah.
But we, it really paid off, I think, because, with the Hills Canyon and all 3 states have got just monster rams now.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I've got here a newspaper clipping from 1903 that's from one of my... I guess it would probably be my great-granddad's journals. It could be my great-great-granddad. And it is the Digest of Oregon Game Laws from 1903. And it says, elk protected until December 1st, 1910. Moose, open season July 15th to November 1st, sale prohibited. So they're already starting to work on the market hunting thing a little bit.
Yeah.
Deer and mountain sheep, open season, July 15th to November 1st, sale prohibited. Silver gray squirrel, open season, October 1st to January 1st. Prairie chicken, west of Cascade Range, open season, October 1st to December 1st, east of Cascade Range. East of Cascade Range, September 1st to November 15th. Grouse, west is open October to December. East, August to November, limit of 15 birds, sale prohibited until February 1902. So this is probably 1901. I lied to you there. Partridge, open season October 1st to December 1st. English partridge, which I'm not sure what that would be.
Hungarians, probably.
Okay. Protected until February 1st, 1904. Pheasants, open season, west of Cascade Range, October to December. East of Cascade Range, protected indefinitely. Quail, same as pheasants. So we weren't allowing any quail or pheasant hunting on the east side of the state. Snipe had a season that went until February 1st. Wild turkey, protected until February 1st, 1904. Right, so we had native turkeys here.
Yeah.
Swan had open season September until March. Ducks were open season September until March 15th. Geese, not protected. And that was the entire hunting regulations.
I know, I've got a copy later than that. It was, let's see, it's in this book, a picture of it. And it was on my great-grandmother's, I don't know, second husband or third husband, but anyway, yeah, it was on his hunting license, the back of his hunting license.
So in 1901, when they say mountain sheep, would that have all been California's?
No, that would have been Rockies here.
Rockies here.
Yeah. And see, they lasted till 1940. I did quite a bit of research on some of the old documents, but there was a study done from then Oregon State College. 2 boys came and spent the summer up in the Wallowas interviewing sheep herders and miners and anybody that had knowledge, and they kept looking for, some sheep, and they'd go to where these guys would tell them, well, yeah, there should be some sheep in such and such, and then they'd get there and they were gone, essentially.
Yeah.
So.
Was there a concerted effort to remove the bighorns, or did it just happen?
No, it just disease took them out.
Okay.
I later found some Quentin Lathrop. The Lathrop clan is pretty big, but he had an old uncle that had worked for the Forest Service when they first formed out in the McGraw country, and him and his partner picked up all kinds of sheep heads, and there were dead, sheep skulls and all over that country.
So what indicates to you at that point that it was disease?
Just the fact that they brought in just thousands of domestic sheep.
Okay.
And then my later experience.
Yeah.
So, then there were all kinds of references, similar stories over the West.
So when you decide, okay, we want to start bringing sheep in here, how does that conversation go at the state level? Like, who are you talking to, and what kind of budgets were you working with? Like, tell me about that Wild West phase of wildlife biology.
Okay, well, the very first sheep we'll get to Rocky Mountains now, and you ask about where the range broke, and from Mammals and Life Zones of Oregon by Bailey. I don't know if it's an old document from the 30s.
Okay.
An old paperback.
I haven't read that one.
Yeah. Anyway, it had quite a bit of information on bighorns in it too, and that basically was where we got which ones were Californians and where the range went, and it was probably about in Baker County was about where the Rocky Mountains started.
Okay.
And part of it was Californians and part Rocky Mountain.
And can they interbreed?
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
And they're not, they're not a totally separate species. They're considered a subspecies, but that was kind of the breaking point. All of Wallowa County and Hell's Canyon was Rocky Mountain country.
Yeah.
And
the terrain here is so interesting because it's an island,
it is.
We have our mountain range, the Wallowas, is a batholith, so it was pushed up out of the ground by the weight of these massive lava flows. Yeah. And on one side, you have the deepest gorge in North America. Then you have the largest shortgrass prairie that's left in America. And then it goes into the river valley and up into this island mountain range. So it's not a long range on a fault line like most of the mountains are throughout the continent. But because of our elevation and the topography, our latitude, it acts like the Rockies. And we ended up with all the animals that are in the Rockies, even though we're an island.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is so different from, just Baker County is where it breaks and changes. Yeah. So,
yeah.
But it's definitely, and it's just world-class bighorn habitat.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so back to those early conversations about you wanting to do this.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, where they would start was with the wildlife staff, and at that time they were in Portland, and usually the districts had a lot of say in it too. But of course, I came along, and I was a Bio 1 at that time, so I was an assistant. Mm-hmm. Even though I did we did have a lot of conversations, and of course, really wanted bighorns to try bighorns here, but somebody in the Portland office worked out the details of the trade with Alberta, and we ended up getting them out of Jasper Park.
And what did we trade them?
We didn't trade them. They've been really good. We really haven't Now, when I was dealing, took a lot of beer sometimes.
A lot of beer
for the bios.
Okay.
But of course, there were some of them that we were really good friends. So
we traded beer for bighorn sheep. That's how they got here?
Not those early ones. They were just the goodness of the Canadians. Well, they had a high population, too.
Wow.
But Nevada was the prime ones when they got sheep from Alberta, and I think they got some from BC too. But they had the big casinos, so they could take a lot of gifts to them to the north.
Interesting. That's funny.
Yeah, but
I guarantee you, people don't know that we traded that kind of stuff to get sheep.
No, and this was bio to bio.
Yeah.
And those early trades were more formalized, and government probably came from the governor, the letter of request. But
that's hilarious.
Anyway, it's pretty interesting to me, though. I'll go ahead and finish. The very first Rocky Mountain Bighorns came from Jasper Park,
mm-hmm.
and they were caught in a corral trap, which I saw the site and actually got to spend a day with one of the park rangers that trapped those sheep.
Wow!
And they came. The people decided that we should put them back at Hell's Canyon Dam. Well, the problem with that, which none of us knew, that there was an issue with disease, although we should have if we'd have read more. But we put them right in there in one of the worst places for domestic sheep, because you had that major stock driveway that came out of, on the ridge there above Hell's Canyon Dam.
Yeah.
And it was winter sheep allotments on both sides of the river. And they just didn't have a chance, and they didn't last either.
Okay.
I mean, we never saw sick ones or anything like that, but we dumped them in April. But fortunately, they offered us another 20 sheep. And so we looked around, and we had to go through an environmental assessment, and which always seems strange to me when you're returning a native species that you have to go through something like that. But anyway, we did, and we decided on the Lost Dean because there was that recent burn, and it was historically, Sheep Ridge was named for the Bighorns.
Okay.
So
interesting.
We got those 20 sheep from Alberta again, and released them in November, right off the county road there on the Lost Dean. Well, it's the Lost Dean Wildlife Area now.
Okay.
But right there. And they pretty much spent the winter, and then when spring came, of course, they didn't know where to go to their summer range, but they knew to migrate. And so we had some go all the way out to the Joseph Viewpoint.
Really?
Yeah, and come back, and then they went out the Hurricane Divide, and right where we were hoping they'd go, and summered, up in the Francis Lake area,
mm-hmm.
and then that to this day that same migration is there. That was 1971, November 1971.
I'll be darned.
So, and they did really well. And until we had the disease outbreak in 85, 86.
Yeah. And for folks that don't know these places, what you're talking about there is like a 2-hour drive. That's a long ways.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So the second go around was more successul. There was still domestic sheep that were grazing in the eagle caps, though.
Oh, there were a lot. Yeah, it's amazes me looking back at it that we didn't have trouble before. But I think when you have smaller populations, they have pretty fixed movements. But as they increase, they're pretty good pioneers, and so they move out. And like you say, there were 2 or 3 bands on the Bear Creek Bear Creek Blaustein Divide there.
And eventually you would get some of the most famous sheep ever, I think.
Right. I mean, they did really well, but that population in Jasper is and adjacent out of the park is a lot of those sheep are on a open pit coal mine.
Okay.
What they did is created artificial sheep habitat.
Yeah.
And then they vegetated it. They'd save the soil, put the soil, but you had those cuts, see, that were their cliffs.
I see.
And so it was perfect. There was even, we trapped sheep there. I was up there 3 different times, and we'd always go in February. And after the days got a little bit longer, but while the sheep were still on that winter range, and there was a coal seam that was on fire.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had this green patch around that coal seam, and here'd be these sheep all around where the flames were coming up out of the ground, but there was fresh green grass. See,
yeah.
But those did just excellent, as long as there were people working at the coal mine. But they had probably close to 1,000 sheep there at one point when we were trapping.
There's an interesting relationship between coal and elk. So some of the biggest elk in the country right now are in coal country.
Yeah.
Eastern Montana coal country is produced the current world record archery bull.
Yeah.
I think there's a good chance the next, like any weapon record bull might come out of coal country in Kentucky.
Yeah, and it sounds like some of those are Oregon elk, by the way.
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew that or not.
Yeah. I'd heard that we had transplanted some
Yeah.
back there. But yeah, no, there's something going on with coal and big critters.
Yeah.
I don't know quite what it is.
Now that mine had really high selenium levels.
Mm.
And so it was to the point it actually poisoned some of the fish and stuff. But I'm not so sure it wasn't a big benefit to the bighorns.
Selenium is so critical.
Yeah.
I take selenium.
At one point, they thought the selenium was one of the reasons that the bighorns herd, some of them didn't do well. But we artificially put salt out up here from the beginning.
Yeah.
And always selenium salt, because I was familiar with it for the importance of it for livestock.
Yeah. Oh, it's critical for cattle. I take selenium every day.
Yeah. But these and those Alberta sheep had the highest selenium levels that we could find.
Wow.
But they were supplemented all the time, see. So.
Do you think selenium is important for elk and deer?
I think it is, yeah. And I used to put out tons of salt all over the forest and rangeland, and I always got selenium.
Would you just kick it out of an airplane?
No, I did some, but in some remote sites and for mountain goats too.
Yeah.
But
those goats love salt, don't they?
They do.
Yeah.
They real.
Down in the Grand Ronde, those goats are so salt hungry, they're coming into campsites just to lick an axe handle or whatever they can in camp.
Yeah. No, they have these problems in the parks, where they come and hit the urine places. But I've told some of those guys, I said, well, why don't you just put salt out where you want them to be, away from the people?
So cheap and easy to do.
It's so easy to do, but some of them just have something against doing anything that they conceive as artificial. So,
I mean, salt is naturally occurring. These animals need
I
it.
can tell you, there's all those natural licks in Hells Canyon and, all over Wallowa County.
Oh, count the number of places around here that are called Salt Creek.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And there's one salt spring down below Hells Canyon Dam. It's a pretty neat spot, really.
Yeah.
Hard to get to.
Yeah, no, there's salt cricks and lick cricks, which are the same thing.
Same thing.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, loads of them.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
No, when I heard that there was starting to be mountain goat issues in camps down there, I offered to boat salt down and, talk to the biologist here about it, the gal that was working here at the time, and she didn't want me to do it.
Yeah.
I was like, look, you're going to have conflict.
Yeah.
This has happened in other places.
Where was it at?
Well, it's that great big red cliff that's down there on the Grand Ronde in the wild and scenic section.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. The goat herd that defies modern goat biology.
Well, there's a couple of them now.
There is one.
Got that one outside of LeGrand.
I know it.
Those goats are damn near in town now.
I called some guys that published this paper, just did, and they were trying to say it was global warming. And I said, boys, you need to come up here and look at some goats that live in hot country.
Very hot country.
Very hot country. And there's all kinds of them along the Snake River Divide that don't have year-round snow.
Yeah.
And it doesn't phase them. They're our most productive goat herds.
Right. They're an adaptable critter.
They are. And I think they got a cougar problem, but they
well, you wouldn't want to bring something like that up,
No,
Vic.
but I did. And they actually did come up and went up to Hat Point. And I said, well, when you go through LeGrand, you look right outside of LeGrand on the south side of the freeway, and there's some goats that there should only be one or two there. And it started that way, but now there's up to 30 that I've heard.
There's a pile of them.
Yeah.
I love it.
It's really interesting. And then there's some above down in Imnaw. I don't know. Did you ever see those?
Mm-hmm.
They're right there. They're right there down there in Prickly Pears.
Yeah.
So
were mountain goats native here?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think we pretty well proved it. That's a pretty good story too.
Well, let's hear it.
Well, it's pretty lengthy. I mean, we could do a program on them.
Well, I got time.
I've got no. They were considered non-native. The Columbia was considered a barrier, and when I was always interested in goats because we had so few, and then we almost shot them out with those seasons because goats can't take much hunting pressure.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I got to looking at some of the archaeological digs, and let's see, I was trying to think of the name of that creek you'd know on the Snake. It's right across from Hat Point, really, but on the Idaho side there was a dig done there because it was washing out, and Idaho Power paid for it. So
Granite Creek, maybe.
No, it wasn't.
Rush Creek's right there.
Yeah, Rush Creek. It was on the Idaho side. Was
Bernard.
Might have been Bernard.
Yeah.
But it's right in there.
Yeah.
Anyway, there were goat remains.
Okay.
And then we found some others in some other digs. And then Pat Matthews and one of the other guys, and I helped him too, but Pat went around to some of the museums and looked at Hudson Bay records, and out of that he found this one document that would actually been done by, I think they called themselves the New York Zoological Society.
Okay.
But they had what they thought was a goat range, and they had them down the Cascades. Yeah. Well, we later verified that, and all the way down to Klamath. So
goats were native.
So goats are native, bottom line.
Enough said.
Yeah.
Did you bring any goats in?
Oh, lots of them.
Where'd you get them from?
Got some from the Olympics.
Okay.
And I say lots of them. We didn't get so many from out of state, but we got those from the Olympics. We got in on that when they were trying to reduce the numbers, and they went to the Elkhorns and Wallowas both.
Yeah.
And then this is going to be hard for you to believe, but we actually traded Idaho 100 elk for 20 bighorns and 15 mountain goats, which I thought was an absolute outstanding grade.
That's a pretty good deal.
And part of the elk came from right a mile from you. I caught him in his hay shed over there. And we took him up the Clearwater because they'd done all this habitat work because they had convinced themselves that it was a habitat issue for why their elk were declining. And then they didn't have enough elk didn't come into their where they did all their habitat work. So they decided they'd transplant some. So some of them came from here. And I don't know, the story was the Indians enjoyed them, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what really happened.
Huh.
Other than I know we took about 30 or 40 elk to Idaho. But out of that, we got the Lower Imnaha, the sheep for the Lower Imnaha.
Interesting.
And, they came from the salmon, and we got a bunch of salmon river sheep. Then later in trades that we worked out with Idaho Fish and Game, and but back to the goats, that kind of started it. But when the goats did so well on the elk horns, all of a sudden we had a source in state.
Right, you'd created your own nursery.
Yeah, and we had a little trouble selling the fact that we all considered mountain goats native.
Right.
And it took the staff a longer time to figure it out. But we forged right ahead. We ended up doing some transplants. The first one was to Hat Point, and then P.O. Saddle. And then, that's why we now have probably pretty close to 1,000 goats in Oregon.
Well, in that same vein, we had a wolf recovery plan in Oregon before we ever had a wolf. And then at one point, we had over 70 moose living in Wallowa County.
Yeah.
And I was just begging to get a moose recovery plan and do something.
I tried and tried, but I think probably they were mad at me anyway, so.
Well, everything that I got told was, no, we're not going to do that because moose aren't native. And then I found these old hunting regulations that
had moose in
have moose in them from 1901.
Yeah.
And not only were they present, but there was an open season on them. Like there's no limits on the moose.
Yeah.
It's like, obviously this is a native species, and we're still not doing anything to protect them.
Not
it's
anything.
So hurtful.
I know it is, and I've tried to scald them in the newspaper and everything else, but so far, and I guess Katrina, the assistant bio down here, gave a little presentation at Wallowology, and Jim Atkinson went to it, and he said she did a pretty good job for not having really much experience. But trouble is, there's been nothing done since Pat left.
Yeah.
So.
No, it's tough. Gosh. But, we had a real opportunity to bring back a native species.
Oh, we did.
As they started to come in, out ahead of that wolf pressure from Idaho.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid we've just lost the opportunity now.
Well, they're at pretty low numbers, I think.
Yeah. And extremely low in Idaho as well.
I know it. I know it.
It's just too bad.
Have you looked at? Do you ever look at? There's a program that it's Nevada Outdoors, I think it's called.
No.
It's kind of like Oregon Field Guide.
Okay.
But they had a really good program on moose. Did you know they had their first season this year?
I did know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, those moose left central Idaho out of the Frank Church and that timber country out ahead of that wolf pressure, same deal. And they're getting way out in the desert in southern Idaho and out into the Bruno. And then the next thing you know, they're crossing the Rubies and they're into northern Nevada.
Yeah. No, it was really an interesting program. And they're department was heavily involved in some research projects, and they really did a good job with that program. And I thought Oregon could have done the same thing.
Yeah.
There is one more complicating factor, and that's the Nez Perce still hunt them unlimited.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, treaties are treaties.
I know they are, and we just need to keep working on the tribe and get them more involved, I think, is the secret.
Yeah, I think it would be great, and I'm sure that they're interested in having
the
a sustainable
Umatillas have a
population.
Have a season, and for a while we had some of the tribal members that there was some market hunting going on with tribal members, and boy, they were all over that, and so I thought we were going to do some good, but then the numbers have dropped so much too. But we just need to get them involved, and then the department will come along, I think. But
the Colvilles are real keen wildlife managers as well, and that's the Chief Joseph Band of Nez Perce belongs to the Colvilles. Right. So I need to do a podcast with some of their tribal elders at some point. And talk about their wildlife management, because I'm very impressed by what they've done.
I know one of the bios there, if he's still there, that was responsible for bringing sheep back. In fact, I went over all these habitat maps and told him I'd help him any way I could. And
I've got one more wildlife transfer question before we get back to sheep here. I heard a rumor that we traded elk to Texas for Rio turkeys.
We did.
And that's how we got Rios here?
That's how we got one of the ways.
Did you do that?
I was not involved in that trade. I was involved in one in Kansas.
Oh, really?
And they got some elk.
Okay.
For turkeys.
Really?
It was Dave Jackman's dad.
Huh.
So, and they went out on his ranch. That was the start of the turkeys on the north end.
We have tremendous turkey populations.
No,
now.
I know we do.
Like, you want to talk about a success story?
I know.
Not everybody feels that way.
I know. That's good. But somebody grumbles.
Yeah, somebody's going to grumble.
Yeah.
But no, there's a pile of turkey around anymore. A buddy of mine from Idaho, I'd only been back from Africa for like 2 days. So I was all jet lagged, didn't know what in the heck was going on. He said, "Hey, I want to come over and get a turkey. Are they still gobbling?" I said, "Probably." He said, "Do you know a spot?" I said, "I really don't put that much effort into it," but I sent him a pin on the map, and I said, "This is probably a decent spot to find it." He drives over from Boise that night with a fella from down south, and that guy from down south is named Ethan Strunk, and it was his 8th state he'd hunted turkeys in this spring. Guy was just nuts for the birds.
Yeah.
And they drove to my pen, hiked off the road over to a ridge, called, had a couple toms gobbled back from a roost tree, came back, spent the night here. They left at 3:00 in the morning, as a turkey hunter does. And, before the diners were open the next morning, they had 2 toms killed right on that spot. Yeah, I don't know. Turkey hunting can be a lot of fun. It can be real hard sometimes. It can be pretty darn easy sometimes too.
Yeah. I'm actually working on another book if I ever get it done. But it's got all the history of our turkey releases, and it's pretty impressive, and all the other game birds in Wallowa County. So,
I've talked to now since you retired from ODFW, I've talked to 4 different biologists now about getting turkeys here on the 6th ranch so that I can provide some youth hunting opportunities.
Yeah.
And everybody says sure to start with, and then they say maybe, and then they say no.
Yeah.
And I've just tried, and I think it would be so great because we're only a few miles from town. And, we could get kids out here and give them like a real fun introduction into hunting and like a controlled and managed and successful environment here in these pastures along the river bottom.
No, that's real good habitat.
It's great habitat.
Yeah.
And, we're willing to do it. And It doesn't work. The other thing I've tried to work on is sharptail out here on the other side of the canyon because we had a lek out here.
I know. And see that when I left, that ended the sharptail program.
You know, I was willing to donate that entire area and plant whatever we needed to plant in there, and make that sharptail habitat. And there's just no interest in it.
No, I did. It just, I don't know. Maybe they thought obviously they thought I spent too much time with the sharptails too. But are there any left anymore? I had a guy down there by Sam Wade's that lives back up there. He's a guy that's got the airstrip.
Mm-hmm.
He found some hatched eggshells.
Okay.
And Bill Abels and him are good buddies. And Bill I said, well, get those eggshells. And I think I'm just sure they're sharptail eggs because I had some other ones from, we had a lot of successful nests here, and I had eggshells from them, and I'd say 98% sure that was a nest.
So look, Vic, if I wanted to carry your torch here and get them going again, is there a place that I can get sharptail from?
They're really hard to get. That was the biggest thing. And it's very manpower intensive to get those hens.
Okay.
Because you have to wait till they come in on the lek, which means somebody sits there from an hour before light.
Yep.
And then you hit the trap, and if you catch 2 in a day, that'd be an absolute good day. So you're getting just a handful of hens, and then you've got a predation issue.
Yeah.
And then you've got behavioral issues that nobody seems to pay any attention to.
What are the behavioral issues?
Well, you're moving them. A lot of them are migratory.
Mm.
And so you're moving them to strange habitat. And some of them, I think, go looking for home.
Okay.
Because we had some that made some major moves, but we also had some that stayed. So you just have to have numbers that's really hard to come by.
What would I need to do to that smooth brome prairie habitat to make it better for birds?
Smooth brome is horrid.
It is.
Orchard grass was good.
Okay.
And alfalfa orchard grass mix.
Would there need to be some shrubs too?
Shrubs would help because they are budders.
Okay.
But where most of those leks were, there were no shrubs to speak of.
Sure.
And that was one weak point that people would point out that came from other sharptail areas. And ours, some of them would move to the river bottom, probably down on your place.
Mm-hmm.
But that was one of the keys, is trying to get the numbers up above the hawk and predation levels. And then the other killer are fences.
Oh. But
there's a way you can mark those fences with there's tags, and there's some of them out on that old study area where we mark those fences, but they'll fly into them.
Okay, so you put some flattery on them or something.
Yeah, like they do for sage grouse.
Yeah. Okay.
And we had no idea that went on until, some of the studies. But
well, if somebody's out there listening and they think they can get some sharp-tailed grouse and they want to work on this, I've got the habitat, I've got a historic lek. And I'm willing to do the habitat work to improve it and make it for them.
Well, you already have done some on the river bottom.
We've done a lot, and we're going to do more.
Yeah,
we've got it. We're in the works to expand that river project right now. We should be starting on that next winter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but Oregon Hunters is really working on trying to get the department going on sharptails again.
Okay.
Tyler Dungannon.
Okay.
He's been really good.
Good. Okay, back to sheep.
Okay, we better get back to sheep.
So we got the first round didn't work. The next round worked in the eagle caps.
Right.
And then what happened?
Then we started trapping. The Lostine did well enough. We started trapping and moving sheep. And that didn't pan out too good.
Okay.
They would come home. And we learned a lot about, you'd move them. And we weren't able to move them too far because we didn't have clearance to transplant them.
Gotcha.
So
were you moving them in horse trailers, or how are you doing it?
We moved them on snowmobiles from the sheep range up here, or we would plow that road with a little bitty cat. Sometimes took 3 days, and then it'd bow shut.
Sure, instantly.
It was always an adventure.
Yeah,
and at first the sheep were wild enough that when you'd come up to the trap, away they'd go.
Yeah.
And then finally they figured out, well, these are the guys that bring us salt and pellets. There's no reason to run. And then they got to their tame stage, which made them a lot easier to trap.
Yeah.
But we traded, too. We traded sheep to both Washington and Idaho. I took, several loads of sheep to the country out by Salmon. And then we took some to Joseph Wildlife Area, and so we were pretty active getting the Salmon River stock did really well. Most of those transplants survived, like the Lower Amnaha.
Yeah,
and then we started, really going after other transplants in the other states that I talked about, especially Montana and Alberta. And when we got in BC, too, there's some Rocky Mountain Bighorns there that they actually had been transplanted in the 20s over onto the California range. And so they were trying to get rid of the Rocky Mountains, which we were more than happy to help do. But that was quite an adventure, too. The site we were trapping on was by a little town that was right on the freeway. And as soon as people found out we were taking sheep from BC to Oregon, they weren't in favor of it much.
Right.
And so the trucks would go by and honk and flip you off but we finally got a pretty good batch of sheep and took them up the Snake River and Asotin, Washington. All 3 states were involved, so all 3 got a transplant. But
now I've been told that if you did a genetic test on just about any sheep in North America, that it would have some mouflon in it.
I don't think so.
No?
I don't know of anything.
Okay.
There could be some herd that had some crosses, but we had one mouflon for a while down in the Lower Amnaha.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally shot it out of the helicopter.
I wish you hadn't done that. I want.
They're deadly disease-wise.
Yeah, but it's something that I could actually go hunt. I can't afford sheep, and I only have one lifetime and not 40. So
you'll probably draw one this year.
I looked at my seed numbers. It's not looking looking good for me. But we'll see.
No, they're just they're just deadly.
Yeah.
Too.
Okay. Another question. I believe that at one time we had ibex.
You know where that came from? It came from 2-year-olds, Rocky Mountain Bighorns. They look like an ibex.
You think?
Yeah.
I don't know, Vic. So
let me. I might have a picture here that not of an ibex, but
of that painting
of the sheep. That there's certain age classes that will look like an ibex.
So let me string out my theory here a little bit.
Okay, go.
There's ibex in Mongolia, and we know that we had this mass migration of animals across the Bering Land Bridge. There are paintings in Far Eastern Asia that are fully accepted as ibex that look exactly like the ones that are in the Columbia that we say are not ibex. And when we had this major flood event of the Missoula floods, I think that could have had the potential to kill entire species in the Columbia River. You know, if you've got a 100-foot wave going 60 miles an hour coming down that canyon.
It wiped things out, no doubt. Let's see, I don't see the ones that look like ibex are in California herds they're much more prominent.
Okay.
But I don't see any.
So you don't think we ever had ibex? See, I think you're just being like the guys that told you that we didn't used to have mountain goats.
No, I've just been through so much of the literature looking for mountain goats and trying to verify, other species that I don't think.
Okay. I would love to have ibex in Hell's Canyon.
Yeah. Well, New Mexico's got.
Yeah.
They've got those ibex.
In the Floridas.
Yeah.
Yeah. They've got them in Texas.
Yeah. Well, Texas says you might run into anything in Texas.
I just learned that Texas has a growing wild warthog population because the warthogs don't respect a fence at all.
No, not at all. Not at all.
And they're starting to spread out. And some.
I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised.
They don't reproduce at near the rate that feral pigs do.
Yeah.
But there are warthogs that are spreading out throughout that country that's sort of southwest of San Antonio.
Are they allowing some hunts on those ranches? Or?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But since it's a non-native animal, if you find it and have a hunting license, you can hunt it in Texas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I love warthogs.
Yeah. Yeah, I do too.
But ibex in Hell's Canyon, aoudad in Hell's Canyon. Yeah. What do you think?
Not audads either, because they're
coming.
Their disease will shoot them.
Yeah,
the department will.
They're all the way up into the North Fork of the John Day now.
I know they are.
I love it.
Yeah. Have you hunted them down there then?
I hunted them outside of Madras. I've hunted them in Texas.
Yeah.
I think they're a terrific animal.
Texas is having problems with them too because they can carry mycoplasma and spread it to bighorns.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with them in the John Day too.
But let's talk about the ecology. What is the ecological impact of having bighorns versus not? Because the numbers are so small, it doesn't feel like they're really having an impact on the ecosystem.
Well, it depends. The problem goes right back to disease. That's just the major issue. Diseases, they just, like the Indians. I mean, a lot of them died from disease too because it came with Europeans. And the same thing is true with bighorns.
Yeah.
That's their one weak point.
So do you think that the number of bighorns we have here now are having much ecological impact?
Yeah, in places. But just as soon as they get to about a certain point, then, they're excellent pioneers. Where a lot of people will say, oh, no, they're not, but they are.
Yeah.
And that's what gets them in trouble. Because we've had lost-seen sheep. We had a little ram that happened to have an ear tag, and he went from the Lost-Steen, and he ended up over in Idaho, and then he went up by Clarkston. Then he circled around through the Wanaha, and then, let's see, then he'd stop sometimes for a month or two, and then he finally came back and was in Deep Creek and Snake River, and the wolves got him.
Okay.
Otherwise, I think he came home.
Yeah.
I think he was well on his way.
Interesting.
So that's the big thing is, you can have like Hell's Canyon, most of it's public land, large blocks of public land and no domestic sheep.
Yeah.
And although pack goats can be a problem too.
There's very little of that going on, though.
No, but there's enough, and some of them I had this guy. I gave him my spiel. He was down at the mouth of the Amnaha camp there, and I'll be careful. We always keep our goats up, and then somebody else came along. Here's all these goats. He is out just roaming around, and here's some bighorns right there. I mean, bighorns aren't as attracted to goats as they are to domestic sheep. So, but still, the biggest die-off started from one goat at this Soton. Came from the fair. Okay. Got with some bighorns and some Washington Department people. I got wind of it from a landowner and called them, and they didn't do anything. And then that whole big die-off started. And then that's the one that spread to the mouth of the Amnaha and went up, took out a lot of the Wanaha sheep.
Yeah. That was the one that started in the Grand Ronde.
Yeah.
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 And there was...
Well, it actually started on the Snake and moved to the Grand Ronde.
Okay.
Yeah. But that was over 300 sheep that we documented died.
Wow.
Plus you've got 6 or 8 years that, you have low lamb survival.
So why not just bring in aoudad instead?
Well, for one thing, they're non-native.
Yeah.
And so you'd have a lot of resistance. But I think we just have to keep working with bighorns and try to educate more of the people of the dangers of, especially the farm flocks and the goats. It seems like there's so many goats around where there didn't used to be. There used to always be the 4-H sheep, and a lot of those aren't a big problem because you can talk to the people. But I wouldn't really support aoudads here.
Yeah.
Because I want to see the bighorns thrive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you spent so much of your life working on it.
Yeah.
I can understand.
Yeah.
From my perspective, I would like to see animals that, normal people could go hunt. They could reproduce and actually use this grass and use this terrain and spread out.
We could have 10,000 bighorns easy if it wasn't for the disease issue.
But, it sounds like there's no way the disease issue ever goes away.
I personally am a believer in heavy-duty intervention, or I call it wildlife management, but some don't.
Yeah.
But
as far as like that vaccinating sheep?
But there's no vaccine, that works. But I've seen all of the different changes, and we finally figured out what was going on, really. I mean, and what bacterias were involved, and we've looked some at trying to treat. I've treated some Lostine with drugs, and I felt that they did a lot of good up there. But then there's
Was it ivermectin, or what were you using?
Well, I used ivermectin.
Yeah.
Readily. And in fact, I think I probably killed off the rare population of dung beetles on the Lostine Range.
There's dung beetles up there?
Probably not now.
Yeah. Huh.
But there was. Yeah, I'm sure there. Yeah, I'm sure. But there used to be those big piles. You remember seeing the big piles of bighorn dung all around?
Yep.
And it didn't seem to go away.
Right. Yeah.
That was because somebody poisoned the dung beetles.
Gotcha.
I mean, we were treating the sheep, did it inadvertently, but,
yeah.
And can't prove that scientifically, but
makes sense.
I'm pretty sure that's what happened.
There was signs in Africa on dung beetles, like road signs, so that
was that right?
Recommending, like letting people know that they're in the area.
Yeah.
And, especially if you're in an area that had an elephant.
Yeah.
Because that's what they really like. The elephant, as it turns out, are really inefficient digesters.
Yeah.
So what passes through them still has a lot of quality in it for something like a dung beetle.
Yeah.
And
I remember we were in Kruger Park staying at this this place, and the elephants. There were a couple of little bulls that came in there every night.
Yeah.
And they were, for such a big animal, they were capable of being really quiet.
Oh man.
And the crew with the cleanup crew was out there with wheelbarrows, and it was wheelbarrow loads from those couple of elephants.
Yeah.
So that'd be a real resource for a dung beetle.
I was in the Addo Park, and elephants are such an issue that you can get them there for free. If you pay for the transport, you can have
the elephant.
Yeah. You just got to go out and trank them and transport them. And I was curious how you do that. That's an awfully big animal.
No, it is
And they told me that when they wake up from their tranquilizer, that they go backwards 100% of the time. So you drop that trailer in right behind them after they're knocked out. And when they wake up, they just back up and load themselves.
You shut the gate.
Yeah, real quick.
I was on a preserve the last time I was there, and it was a private preserve, and it was about 30,000 acres.
Mm-hmm.
People had built it and fenced it and had big fancy lodges on it that they rented out to people on the weekends. But our PH had somehow scammed his way into being able to hunt in there during the week.
Yeah.
So it was really fun to go in there.
Cool.
And they were all set to put cheetahs in there.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's still, there's still a lot of wildlife trading that goes on in South Africa.
Yeah.
It's a totally different model. I think the South African model is probably the only one in the world that rivals the North American model.
Yeah.
And it's totally different. It's
totally different. No,
different
it is,
scene,
but it works.
It is working.
And especially for a big population of humans like that, and a lot of them very poor.
65 million people in South Africa.
Yeah.
Crazy high population.
I know it is. It is.
And it feels, when you're traveling through there, it feels very rural and remote.
Yeah.
But massive population.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just massive.
Yeah. No, the elephants are quite a problem down there. And
you could see in that part
bad.
of Kruger Park where we were that there were too many elephants.
Oh, there's not a tall tree left.
Yeah. They just shred them.
Yeah. So, tough deal. I think we're just loving that species to death right now. I think
we are too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people don't want them hunted, and they got all kinds of bans on importing them, which are, if they're coming from the right place, well, there's no reason not to.
Which I get it. They're a really cool animal.
No, they are, and I like them as well as anybody else does, but there's a limit.
There is, and too many elephant is bad for the elephant.
It is, because it just those trees don't just pop up.
No, they're old.
They're old trees.
Yeah.
A lot of other species are probably harmed by their damage to their ecosystem. So
tell me about Spot and Flare, some of the most famous sheep in history.
They are. Well, they were. Spot was. I probably saw him the first year we had sheep. We had 3 or 4 lambs that were born. Of course, we moved. We got them in November, so they probably had a disrupted rut. But in any case, he came from that first group. I mean, he was born right on the sheep range in those White Cliffs, I think. That's where I saw that first lamb. And I don't know for sure that was him, but he just grew to be a tremendous ram. And then Flair, the same. He was at least a year older or younger. Younger. And he too. It's too bad we didn't get the skull off of him, but
so
horns.
What happened to him?
I don't know. We never did locate him.
What happened to Spot?
Spot is an interesting story. Spot ended up dying, probably one of the first ones that died during the disease outbreak in '86, and he ended up. He was over at Ice Lake. Is how he moved over there, see, and so nobody could find him.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know to look there. Well, anyway, we get this anonymous call at one of the offices that a guy had found a large ram, and if he could have it, he'd let us take it, and so we could determine what the cause of death was. Well, he was 14 by then. And, yeah, and really, I saw him not too long before, within a year or so when he died. And so he was really going downhill, and he was blind in that one eye.
Mm.
And then he had such big horns that blinded him some too. But I'm pretty sure he was one of the first that died of disease. And I don't know, you know Eldon Deerdorf by any chance?
Mm-mm.
He's an old guide that worked the upper Imnaha for years, and in fact, Eldon's still alive. But anyway, he told me he saw Spot with some stray domestic ewe on the Imnaha. In fact, he shot the ewe because he was going to feed it to his clients, and so we think that's where it started, because there were several other rams there too.
Well, at 14 and blind,
Yeah, I mean, he could have just died.
Yeah, a stiff breeze would get him.
And so we don't really know that he died of disease, but that was about, the timing would have been right, because that would have been in October or so.
Okay.
But anyway, back to the story of recovering his horns. Anyway, this guy would call once in a while. We tried to trace his phone call. but our OSP boys didn't get it done. And so we finally had this one guy went to WSU, was going to school at WSU, and turned out it was him, and he'd been hiking with his wife or girlfriend up at Ice Lake, and Spot had died and went underneath the pile of logs, that's out at the outlets.
Mm-hmm.
He was under there, and Eddie McGuez and I rode up there, and we walked all the way around that lake, and I know we walked right over his carcass minus the head, because the head was gone, but he was under those logs, see?
Yeah.
And so anyway, we were at nothing happened. And finally, one of the guys said, well, and a federal agent called this guy and went up and visited with him. Well, they scared him bad enough that we get a call from his attorney. I think I can get your sheep head back for you, the attorney said. So anyway, let's see. I think we made a kind of a plea deal, and the boys went up and picked him up, and sure enough, it was Spot.
So it was illegal at that time for him to
pick it up.
To pick that up.
Yeah.
So a lot of states, you can bring a bighorn skull out and have it plugged, and then you can keep it.
Yeah, the problem with that, and Idaho had it firsthand. I know one officer there, they had a guy that was always finding sheep heads.
Mm-hmm.
Come to find out, he was shooting them.
Yeah, he was making them be dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he'd pick them up later.
Yeah.
So we always had a pretty hard-nosed approach.
Yeah, I mean, you can't even pick up a deer or an elk dead head in Oregon.
No. And that's why.
Yeah.
And especially the big ones. The smaller ones wouldn't be an issue, but.
Yeah, interesting. So you don't think there's any kind of mechanism out there that would make it so that people could honestly do that? Like if you just find a natural mortality out there in the woods, that you could retain that skull? Oh,
you could probably work something out. It wouldn't be 100%, but we have a lot more sheep now too, and most of the offices have all kinds of sheep heads that have been picked up.
Right.
And this Oregon wild sheep and Oregon hunters have talked about being able to do like we can with deer and elk now, and be able to, sell the antlers for fundraisers. And because we didn't used to, even like the sheds were on the wildlife areas. They were prohibited from picking them up, but of course they can now.
Right.
But,
I wish that sheds couldn't be sold.
Yeah, that's the problem. Once you get a market for them,
it seems to encourage some pretty unscrupulous behavior.
I know, we had a bull killed down right above Bogans. That happened to be on Rocky Dixon's ranch, and I was flying a survey on his ranch, elk survey, and so we went right over and found it. Got the information to Washington Game Department because it's in Washington.
And somebody had chased that bull and killed it, or?
I don't know that they did a good enough job to say. I don't know that they ever walked in on it. It was up there about halfway to the ridge top. It had been easy to get in on. And I could also see a path where somebody could have come along and shot it too.
Oh.
I mean, there was a pretty easy, that ridge that goes up from Bogans, you could have climbed up that ridge and then just graded around. But it was on Rockies. So if we'd located anybody, we would have trespassed them. So.
But you don't think it was a natural mortality?
No, because the head was cut off.
Oh, gotcha. So,
and it was a big bull up there.
Yeah. Oh,
And that's the trouble, too.
Too bad.
Yeah, we had that one case that my son Craig was involved with where some antler hunters actually pressed this bull enough that they ran him off a bluff and killed him.
I heard about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. And they're just chasing these elk trying to get them to shed, and it's so
And that's what
crazy.
He was trying to do.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they took full advantage when he was dead.
Right. Huh.
But they got caught, too, because there was a guy there with a camera.
Yeah. Good.
So
if you had it to do over again, what would you do differently with the introductions of the various species that you have throughout your career?
Well, the one I really would have kept working on is sharptails.
Yeah.
And moose.
Yeah.
Absolutely, both of them.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you've had a tremendous impact on these species. Just the huge successes of Rocky Mountain bighorns, California bighorns, wild turkeys, mountain goats. There's probably others that I'm not forgetting that, we just wouldn't have these populations if it weren't for you.
We did a lot of mountain quail.
Mountain quail as well.
Yeah, I mean, we supplemented a small population. There was mountain quail in abundance in the 60s here.
Was there?
Mm-hmm. And then they died off to pretty much in the Imrahan Snake River country.
Mm-hmm.
And then we brought in some transplants, and we got them started. Well, once I would start on something, there was a bunch of the bios that didn't want to see me get away with all of the goods.
Yeah.
And so that it'd stimulate them, which was great.
Yeah.
And so that I know they put a bunch in the John Day country, and they did wonderful. I mean, they got, they're hunting them there and mountain quail.
Yeah, I see them in the North Fork of the John Day country a little bit now.
Yeah.
There's some down in some of these gulches and our canyons too.
Oh yeah, there is.
Yeah.
And they're like Lower Joseph Creek and Cottonwood and all of those. I see them on Rocky's place there.
Yeah. Cool.
Pretty commonly, but
cool. Well, I asked you this question last time. I'll ask it again for people who are listening and they want to be involved in wildlife management, but they don't work for an agency. They're just somebody who cares about wildlife, or they're a hunter, which is saying the same thing twice. what should they be doing to get involved and actually do some good?
I would try to get involved with Oregon Hunters or the Elk Foundation too, especially with the acquisition of the Lower Minam. I mean, not that they were the only ones, because there was a lot of money came from Oregon Wild Sheep too, and Oregon Hunters, and just private people that have such an interest in the Minam. But try to get involved in some of those groups, and especially the ones that are more hands-on. But there's something going on all the time. They just had a weekend Minam and Bear Creek work party. Rolled up some old fence on Bear Creek and did some thinning and I don't know, clean up down on the Minam, and I don't know what all, but it was a group of Elk Foundation and Oregon Hunters.
Good.
But that, to me, those groups do a tremendous amount of good, and they also help keep the agencies a little bit more on their toes by questioning some of the things they do, but try to get involved with the groups.
Okay, all right. And then you have, a huge number of stories and lots of good scientific data and history in your book there. Give us the name of your book. I know a bunch of people ended up buying that after we did our last show.
They did. We really appreciated that. It's Memoirs of a Backcountry Bio, 50 Years Managing Wallowa County Wildlife.
Okay. And you guys can find that on Amazon, and I'll put a link to that to that back down in the show notes.
Yeah.
Make it easy for you guys to find it. Yeah. It's a great book, got some great pictures, and again, just a huge amount of historical data in there that Vic has collected that simply might not still exist if it weren't for your efforts in doing so. Keep working on that next book.
These came right out of my journals that I've kept for 60 years. So
yeah, you need to keep working on your next book.
I know, Vic. I do. I
Yeah.
need. You don't know anybody that might be a potential editor that can type, because this is all handwritten. How I start.
I think AI can probably help you out with that a lot.
Yeah, if they could, I've thought about if I could get somebody that could come by like one day a week or something, and maybe work with me on interpreting the document, and then I've got a lady I think will do the work on the old pictures, because I've got hundreds of pictures, and I'm working on both. I've got a draft of Fur Bearers of Wallowa County.
Okay.
And some of the stories about the wolverines and the fisher that aren't here anymore, apparently. So,
all right, folks. Well, if you want to jump on that job, reach out to me, and I'll put you in touch with Vic.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. Thank you for your time, and thanks for your meaningful contributions to wildlife in Oregon. I'll wait another 20 years or so before I really start working on the ibex nodad, so it doesn't stress you out too bad.
All right, that'd be good. Texas is, well, my buddies from Texas Wildlife wouldn't say this, they'd scalp me. But because they have such a problem with exotics.
Yeah.
And I kicked myself 1,000 times for this, but I had one buddy, and they fly there's not much public land.
Right.
But they've got those parks, which are wildlife areas.
Mm-hmm.
And so they do pretty intensive surveys.
Yeah.
And they're the armed gunships, is what they are, the helicopters.
Yeah.
And so I had the chance to go down and fly with them and didn't. I could have got my Grand Slam. Probably not ibex, but certainly AODADs and everything else.
Yeah.
Because they do hands-on wildlife management in Texas.
Yeah, well, I know in that Big Bend area, the aoudad really got out of control and needed to get checked back. But they've also done a lot of good in a lot of places too. So, anyways, all right. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks, Vic.
You're welcome.
Thank you to everyone who has taken the time out of their busy lives to write a review for the show and share it with their friends. I'm extremely proud of how intelligent, engaged, and adventurous this audience is. Original music for the Six Ranch podcast is written and performed by Justin Hay. Art for the Six Ranch podcast was created by John Chatelain and digitized by Celia Harlander. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.